What's up everyone, welcome back to ARTV. My name is John and it's time for one of the most anticipated reviews of the year because it's one of the most anticipated albums of the year for so many people. Back in 2017, the alternative rock band from the UK, Muse, dropped a single titled Dig Down, and they slowly trickled out more singles as 2017-2018 progressed, and here we are, we've landed at Simulation Theory. This shouldn't come as a surprise to a lot of you, but Muse are one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time. I know that they're not exactly the best lyricists in the game or anything like that. There's just been something since like the age of 13 or 14 when I discovered Black Holes and Revelations, their 2006 release, and even Absolution, a lot of their live recordings, that I just fell in love with and found endearing because yes, the lyrics are quite often cheesy, maybe a little bit too fluff in places. I just like the fact that it didn't always have to go so deep. It just was about a good groove, a lot of fun musically, because Muse are sure as hell talented. That's all well and good, but in recent years, I found myself falling out of favor with Muse just a little bit. Their last album, Drones, while I found it to be great at first, it's kind of like a sugar high. I got so amped up because they had a hard-rocking new album out there, and I kind of pushed aside the things that might have popped up in my mind as red flags, and then over time, those red flags just made themselves increasingly apparent. And at this point in time, I'm not a huge fan of that record, although I do like a lot of the songs on there. This led into the first single from Simulation Theory dropping, and that was Dig Down, and believe it or not, I actually do love that song. It's something that's really been ingrained in my memory at this point, and I've played it a countless amount of times in the past year and a half. My rule of thumb is to not listen to more than 2 singles before an album drops, so I did not listen to anything other than Dig Down and the second single, Thought Contagion, that dropped back in the winter of this year. Thought Contagion is a catchy song, a lot of what-ohs, the millennial whoop going on in the chorus. It's okay, I suppose, the chorus that is, but the rest of the song I do feel makes up for it and saves it. It's something that's tied together by a solid rhythm, a lot of really catchy vocals from Matthew Bellamy, and even though it might not be turning any heads with what it's doing, it's still a good 80s influence track that I had a lot of fun with. Given that I personally had only heard 2 singles, I didn't have a lot to go off of other than fan reaction online for what to expect with the sound and the style of Simulation Theory. This is a record that kind of quite jarringly jumps all over the map, and it's not exactly a good thing. I could say good things about when they did that on The Second Law back in 2012. That is an album that I feel is so underrated and vastly underappreciated in many ways because they did go out on a limb, they experimented, and they truly excelled. It was a record that I loved right away. This, however, is not one of those albums. This is an album that I sit down and listen to, and I hear the conflicted mind of Matthew Bellamy and Dominic and Chris, and I hear them being pulled in different directions, not because a label wanted them to be, but because they're putting the pressure on themselves. A couple of decades into your career as a band, I totally understand that it is hard to pull out invigorating material, stuff that challenges you personally, but also is fun for the listener, or at least engaging in some capacity. Sadly, Muse do not strike a very good balance of pleasing themselves and entertaining their creative bone, but also feeding something to the fans that's going to be enough substance to get them through the next few years until another record, another EP, whatever. Just to kind of give you an idea and paint a picture of what this album does, it starts off on this kind of dark synthwave track, Algorithm, that actually sounds pretty ominous, like they were inspired by the Stranger Things soundtrack, but then you can go from that into Pressure, which they even have a version on the deluxe edition with the UCLA marching band. Then you can move from that into Something Human, which is a pretty silly sci-fi leaning acoustic track that just doesn't do a whole lot. And then there's something like Break It To Me, which has this dubstep swaggering beat that sounds like Justin Timberlake's filthy dry humping Matt Bellamy. Ladies and gents, that is not a compliment, and it pains me to have to tear into a song like that. I will save more of my thoughts until we get to the tracklist breakdown, but just to see how it can go from something that opens up on such a promising note into such a lackluster, in fact downright bad middle section of the album. It's just so underwhelming and also simultaneously frustrating. There are a few tracks that definitely bring the guitar to life. Blockades is one of those. The Dark Side has a great solo and a nice rhythm. The drums, while maybe a little bit more restrained, are still doing some very special things, backing a few of these tracks. And the synthesizers, that's never something that I'm necessarily going to outright complain about just because they're synths. In fact, Muse have worked that perfectly into their sound in the past, and a few of these tracks even reminded me of cuts like Bliss in their past discography. Positives and negatives, where do we even begin here? Because there is such a tough line to draw between what is good, what is passable, what is different but still fine. I don't want to seem like I'm coming across as that guy that cannot accept or handle change, because I have seen Muse perfectly execute pop before. Undisclosed Desires, many of their other tracks have poppy tendencies. I would even dare say something like Panic Station was a little bit out there for them back in the day. And Madness, a song that grew to be one of my favorites, one of my top 10 favorites from Muse. It's something when I listen to this record, I don't feel those things. I don't have that connection. And I feel like what's missing is not only any lyrical content that offers any real depth or any real commentary into the fact that this is kind of like a sci-fi loose concept album, simulation theory. That's a pretty cool idea right there. The fact that we could all be living in something like the Matrix. But do they flesh these ideas out? Not really. They just kind of go paper thin, and that's kind of Muse's calling card. I hate to call their bluff, but that's what they do. Let's look to Get Up and Fight, for example. This is a song that features Tovlo, a Swedish pop star, doing the backing vocals here. It's led in, and it's kind of like do 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 do, and then it kind of gets going, and then it's like get up and fight, and it's just like this amplified chorus that you feel you've heard from Muse so many times before. It might be this album's Mercy. The other people and sounds that they're borrowing from include Shellback, who is known for working with Maroon 5 and Taylor Swift, and also Timbaland, somebody you might recognize is the very frequent collaborator of Justin Timberlake, which is why I brought up the filthy comparison with Break It To Me. Oddly enough, Timbaland didn't help write Break It To Me, it was the track before that, Propaganda, which, oh my god, cleanse my ears now, please. The biggest crimes that this album commits is the fact that it feels vastly outdated, underperformed, and just underwhelming. If they were coming in with these bold, brash ideas and presenting them in a way that was undeniable, which I kind of feel like they do on a few songs, if they did that overall, then I might see this as a passable album for Muse, something that was different but still solid. The problem here is that they take these different production cues and a different style of writing, not necessarily, but it feels even a little bit more lukewarm than usual. And then they pair it up on some of these tracks, doing these weird things like Break It To Me ending on something that sounds like a DJ battle between shitty Steve Aoki and then Joe Hahn from like Hybrid Theory, Linkin Park, all while a science fiction theme plays in the background. It's like a mega mashup that just sounds ear-piercing. Let's calm things back down for a second. I want to talk about some of the songs that I do like from the album. I already mentioned this, but I absolutely love The Dark Side. That is one that gets things right. It takes the guitars, it takes the music, the passion, Matt Bellamy's energy, and it applies it in a different sounding way, but also one that is very Muse-ish. The opening track nails that as well, Algorithm. It has some of those swirling pianos that are going to remind you of Origin of Symmetry, and that is actually my favorite Muse album. So to hear something that feels like it is mixed with like synth rock and then piling Origin on top of that, it's definitely a sweet gem for me. Let's be honest, Simulation Theory opens up on a few very, very solid tracks. I even like Pressure well enough. I don't think that it is mind-bending, anything to get that excited over. but it's a decent song. I like the brass section in the background. The guitar is kind of hooky. It kind of gets stuck in your head, and you know what? I'm not mad about that. I can at least say that I like the vocal melody in Break It To Me. That is one positive there that stands out among the wreckage, although it definitely does not salvage that moment. It is a likable aspect, and I hear things like that in other songs that I don't like. Some of the tracks that disappointed me the most, though, besides this middle section going from Propaganda, Break It To Me, and Something Human, would be the closing track, The Void, which really does kind of feel void of any real substance or life. It feels like it was lifted from one of those Spotify playlists that just like worships the 80s, and it has all of that music that's really just instrumental, the knocking synths that are supposed to remind you of the 80s. I felt like Algorithm presented the idea of the record, the loose concept, quite well, and then The Void is closing out on a not so meticulous note. It's just that one that floated out there, and there it is. Something Human is something that I did touch on earlier. It's a pretty abysmal track if you ask me, not because it's Muse taking on an acoustic guitar or taking on something slower, because once again, I have to reiterate because people don't understand, they have executed these things well in the past, but the problem here is that the lyrics, the story, the whole romantic angle that's being taken, I'm 200 miles from home and I'm on another planet essentially. I appreciate the music video. I appreciate all of the music videos that they're doing. They all look pretty damn fantastic to the eye. But the issue I have is with the music and just how genuinely shallow it feels. It's like walking out into this ocean and then there is just a little puddle. You thought you were swimming with the waves, and here you are standing in like a foot of water. I close this out on a positive note though, so the final song that I want to mention is the best song on this record, track number 9, Blockades. This is a song that definitely has this feeling that's conjured up, that's like Black Holes meets maybe Origin of Symmetry, a track like Bliss meets Knights of Sidonia, for example. And it's a great vibe to get from this with the cascading synthesizers that really set the tone and the pace, and that rapidly mixes in the guitar as well. And then it has a dominating chorus and kind of a furious vocal performance from Matt Bellamy. It's nice to see him getting more engaged, but also Chris with the bass and Tom with the drumming here. It actually feels a little bit more pulsating and a little bit more demanding, because half of this record, I could really just not find myself honing in on those instruments. I couldn't hear them in the mix, and that's a huge problem for a Muse album. But on Blockades, all of those things come to life, and it's like you still have it, but then you chose to make so many of these songs that just are asinine. Can you feel the disappointment dripping from me? Because I can practically see it oozing from my pores. Muse's Simulation Theory, their 8th studio album, is not a sight to behold so much as it is one to just kind of like gnash your teeth to, and you're like, ooh, some of this is pretty cringy. And guys, again, this is coming from a huge fan. I love Muse. I love all of their albums except for really this one, and I still have a lot of love for Parts of Drones. There are good songs here, but by Muse standards, this is easily at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of album ranking. This gets a 2.5 from me, and that comes with a heavy heart, trust me. At the end of the day, it is just my opinion, so if you understand that, please drop a like on the video, and of course show your support by joining the comments down below, join the discussion, and be kind to each other. And of course, if you would like to see all of my Muse videos, they are in this convenient playlist here, or catch that Florence and the Machine top 10 here. Socials in the description, Patreon below, and I'll see you soon on ARTV.